Welcome back to another video, my amazing viewers. This was one of two video topics that got picked in the Discord server. If you wish to join the Discord server to either participate in the next vote or just have a fun little look around, I'll include the link in the description. Craftworld Iyanden. Best way to put it, right now, currently in this setting, they're being held together with a mixture of glue, willpower, and souls of the dead. The last one I'm not even kidding about. But this isn't to undersell them. They still are one of the most capable craft worlds. But a little history before we get into it. As we all know, the war in heaven mostly took place because the Necrons got angry that they got denied their cure from cancer. The Necrons here became the Necrons proper with the Catan, aka Star Gods, on their side, and the old ones created the Quarks and uplifted the Eldar. But eventually, this Eldar psychic power brought on the Enslaver Plague, an unknown species from the warp that killed all the old ones. Afterwards, the Necrons went to sleep after shattering all the Star Gods, now keeping them as basically enslaved Pokemon. It was just the Quirk and the Eldar. And since the Quirk were nothing more than a militant race, the Eldar genocided them into becoming the Orcs, which we know now. But since the Eldar had viewed this as them winning the war, which in all eyes they technically did, they began to slouch around for a few million years, knocking out whatever race decided to stand up to them, and ultimately were the unofficial rulers of the galaxy. But all this came to an end when slowly but steadily they began to have violently over-the-top sexual plays and parties. This was a wide-scale problem all over the Eldari Empire, but we're focusing on one city, the Dark City of Kamara, where this was most rampant. But due to the fact that they were in the webway, when the inevitable downfall happened, birthing a chaos god which consumed all their souls, they actually were mostly safe, besides the fact that it was slowly sucking away at them. But luckily, all they had to do was torture some other people in order to feed it, but also, they were still into it. The next two groups were wise enough to realize the inevitable fall of their people, so chose to dip. The first one being one that gets little to no representation on the tabletop, which is sad, the Exodites, which essentially just populate maiden worlds, utilizing cool dinosaurs. Yeah, they chose to leave the second they saw all the weird incest shit that was happening. Last, but definitely not least, comes the Craftworld Eldar, the ones with the most sway power in the current Warhammer setting, and may or may not have secretly been helping out during the Horus Heresy. Not on Horus' side, jackasses, don't they just clip out of context. Anyways, the Craftworld Eldar fled as soon as they found out what all their brothers and sisters were doing back at the rest of the Eldari Empire. And after Slaanesh was birthed, they realized that Slaanesh, being the goddess of excess and pleasure, still wanted them. But now, speaking of Slaanesh, let's get to that. Slaanesh, being birthed from all this depravity, pleasure, and excess from the Eldari Empire, basically was birthed violently into the physical materium through the Eye of Terror, which we're honestly genuinely hoping is the Eye of Terror, but knowing Slaanesh, it's probably not. But because of this violent birth, she consumed all their souls, except for the outmentioned factions I just listed, and almost all the Eldar Pantheon, consuming all of them except for Isha, who she gifted to her brother Nurgle. Cain, who her and Khorne fought over till he was shattered to a bunch of pieces and thrown onto the craft world, temporarily sparking bloodlust. And then Kekaroth, the Eldar clown god, who made the Harlequins and is still in the webway somewhere, the strongest remaining, and of course the Eldar death god. But after Craftworld Iyanden was done shanking everyone, they decided to go ahead and create the Infinity Circuit, which of course is something you're supposed to put a soul stone into, so that way the Eldar soul can rest in a pre-made paradise, better than being vored by Slaanesh for all of eternity. Anyways, afterwards they gifted this technology to other craft worlds, only asking for one thing in return: their assistance. All the other craft worlds said hell no and went back to doing nothing, except for Craftworld Belton, aka the genocidal maybe Imperium. My point is that Belton and Iyanden together were one of the best things that happened to the Eldar, due to the fact that Belton would genocide whatever world the Iyanden told them to, and in return Iyanden would sprout that world with life, so that way they could turn that world to a maiden world to set up colonies on. But Unfortunately, good things won't last forever, especially not in Warhammer. And inevitably, this alliance fell apart due to the fact that Belton kept on being more, well, murdery. And because of that, Craftworld Iyanden decided it'd just be best and just to cut him off. But this would slowly lead towards Craftworld Iyanden starting to utilize Wraith units. If you don't know what a Wraith unit is, it's essentially whenever you take a soul stone from the Infinity Circuit and slapping it into a brand new body so the warrior can fight once more. It is heavily looked down upon and frowned upon in Eldar society to use these things, due to the fact that you're basically ripping somebody's grandfather out of a Eldar-made paradise and slapping them back onto the battlefield so they might possibly get vored by Slaanesh. Because I want you to know, if the Soul Stone gets destroyed, bye-bye Eldar. But, rounding back to the Craftworld thing, this isn't to say that they didn't have many allies still. But their two remaining Craftworlds, one was destroyed by a singular Space Marine chapter, even though these are planet-sized ships, well more defended than former Arcadia, and the other one, it's no more, let's say the least. But the start of the downfall for Craftworld Iyanden began after some Chaos Fleets heard about what happened to the one Craftworld that got basically eradicated by a single Space Marine chapter and decided maybe multiple Chaos chapters could do that. Long story short, they didn't, due to the fact that Prince Uriel had grabbed all the Craftworld Iyanden ships and single-handedly bested the Chaos fleets. Not single-handedly, obviously, but this left the Craftworld poorly defended. And from every source that I read, even if they'd left one single ship behind, it would have prevented this tragedy from happening. The Chaos ships had let off 36 ballistic torpedoes at the ship, and the ship's defenses were able to destroy 35. But, unfortunately, this still left one, which left a massive hole in the ship, killing thousands of Eldar, destroying their soul stones, and allowing Slaanesh to feast on their souls. Obviously, this left the Eldar feeling very pissed off. This was a very bad incident, and once they began to question Prince Uriel, he said, "Cry about it, I did my best." And in return, they said, "Yeah, we'll cry about it while you're out of here," and they kicked him out of the Craftworld. But of course, he took some Eldar that believed in his cause and left. Now, something to note after this whole fiasco is that the light of Assyrian, which glowed bright every time Iyanden did something to further their process in becoming, the Eldar Empire once more, instead of the Empire shambles, it straight out snuffed out. Which means Assyrian was capable enough to keep this fire going until he viewed that they lost his favor. Knowing that this missile was going to hit, instead of doing something like, I don't know, blocking the missiles. I'm agreeing with Pancreas, no works here when I say that that's just kind of petty. This also meant that after this whole fiasco went off, Wraith units were no longer something that they needed to keep the momentum going of conquering. It's just something in order to keep the military holding together, Now, like I said, this was only the start of their very, very harsh downfall. As soon, Craftworld Iyanden would encounter a Tyranid Hive fleet, but of course they managed to beat them relatively easily. So, when Eldrad himself, a very powerful Sparseer, had shown up and told them that the upcoming wave of Tyranids from Hive Fleet Kraken would be way worse, they didn't believe him. They thought that Craftworld Othwan was trying to steal their position. The Craftworld that is physically stuck to the giant anus in reality. Yeah, that one was trying to steal their position. But, to give Craftworld Iyanden some credit, they did initially brush off the first attack by the Tyranids. But the second one was far more dangerous and deadly. Since, while yes, half of Kraken went to go deal with the Ultramarines, the other half didn't forget about the Eldar and ran its way right to Iyanden. But everyone was helping out Iyanden, since this was basically its last stand, since their army was pretty replenished from the first few rounds of fighting. Belton sent forces, other Craftworlds too, but mostly Belton because, they get to surrender aliens. Even a few Harlequins are there, basically the elven equivalent of custodians. This was Iyanden's last true stand. But even with all this extra help, they were still losing. For every life lost, it was a horrendous loss, since it takes the Eldar forever to reproduce. But for the Tyranids, just another soldier in the endless grind for more biomass. And slowly yet steadily, they made their way throughout the Craftworld, consuming all, damning so many to Slaanesh. But not all was lost. As for when they let out one final cry for anyone to come, one man did, Prince Uriel, and he brought with him a fleet of ships, which quickly defeated the bioships, since in his time in solitude, he ended up becoming a successful pirate and making an entire fleet for himself, nay, making a name for himself out in the stars. And once his home Craftworld called, when they were on their final knees, he decided to come once more and save them. As for he may have once failed them, but not twice. After this, Craftworld Iyanden really relied upon their Wraith Lord units, since this was the only thing that really helped them keep any sort of military presence, due to the fact that most of their population was now gone. But their luck wouldn't be any better, since in the future they would end up fighting a war against the orcs, due to the fact that once they were clearing out a solar system infested with them. It was going pretty well, until out of nowhere, a orc war Hulk, please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, appeared out of nowhere. Both sides unable to believe their luck, since, the Eldar were going to not have the time of their lives. Meanwhile, the orcs were going to have themselves a good old-fashioned scrap. And so they did, once more bringing Iyanden to its knees. But this time, the Dark Eldar, yes, those Dark Eldar, came to save them. Not because of the fact that these were their fellow species, or because, it would have been a tragedy, or any Eldar living would just help out. No. It was due to the fact that the suffering and edge from using Wraith units from Iyanden was so good, they didn't want a tragedy like that to stop happening. Yes, talk about petty, am I right? But what should we take from Iyanden from this video? That Craftworld Iyanden actually stands on business. Forgive me for the terminology. But they were the ones who made the Affinity Circuit. They also, with Craftworld built on, attempted to rebuild their empire. Not to mention, they're actually one of the few smarter Craftworlds, instead putting in their populations onto their maiden worlds, meaning at any moment they could choose to recall these populations to rebuild their Craftworld, but realizing it's better not to have all their eggs in one basket, so if something like the orcs or Tyranids were to attack, their population wouldn't be all gone. There'd still be the maiden worlds to help resupply them. Ultimately, Craftworld Iyanden, yes, they may be the edgiest of all Craftworlds, but this does not mean we should take them for losers. I say they're definitely a W tabletop. Now, as for any of my viewers that might be watching this on Christmas, Merry Christmas! It's a Christmas miracle by sure that this video managed to be get out, but consider this my gift to you all for deciding to stick around. And if you stayed this long, please like, comment, and subscribe, because I really need it. But I do have some other videos in the pipeline, like the Ultramarines, Terminator Armor, Harlequins, Craftworld Oathwan, and some other fun stuff like You Wouldn't Survive series, as well as some SCP stuff that might be coming out. Secure, Contain, Protect, brothers. Anyways, hope y'all have a fun holiday.